We're witnessing tonight the growing ambition and opportunism of a great military power. And it is not the United States, it is Russia, because Russian military units are moving up towards the Turkish border to keep the peace and to keep the Turks out. Now, President Trump is calling on Turkey to deliver an immediate ceasefire, and indeed he's sending Vice President Pence here in the next 24 hours with the same message. But the Americans are not calling the shots, the Russians are, and Syrian Kurds are grateful for whatever protection they can get now. I must warn you that some viewers may find some images in my report distressing. Growing condemnation of Turkey's military action came too late for these children. They're Syrian Kurds living near the city of Manbij, and they've been injured by Turkish shelling. As President Erdogan defies American sanctions, European arms bans, and every effort to persuade him to pull his troops back. American forces are abandoning the Kurds under cover of darkness, leaving them either to the advancing Turks or to President Assad and his Russian backers. And so, in Manbij, this Russian military police patrol is filling the vacuum President Trump has gifted to them. It's a dramatic shift in the balance of power here. And at the city's former American base, a Russian journalist was filmed bragging about it. Yesterday, the Americans were still here, he said, but now it's us. President Assad is also taking back hundreds of miles of territory without so much as a fight. A man condemned for using chemical weapons against his own people, invited in by the Kurds as their least worst option. And that is after this, the summary execution on Saturday of several Kurds, shot by Arab militiamen fighting on the Turkish side. The UN is investigating and says Turkey could be responsible for war crimes. Donald Trump's decision to withdraw effectively gave the green light to President Erdogan. 1 week later, the American president has put tariffs on Turkish steel and sanctioned Turkish ministers, though many in Washington say he hasn't gone far enough.
I blame Turkey. There's going to be crippling sanctions imposed by the Congress to supplement what President Trump's administration has done. We're going to send a signal to Turkey that's unmistakable in the eyes of Erdogan and the world, and we're going to break his economy until he stops the bloodshed.
In London, NATO's Secretary-General has been gauging support for further action against Turkey, which America wants. The British will continue selling Ankara weapons, but they've now followed the French and Germans in suspending future export licenses.
This is not the action we expected from an ally. It is reckless, it is counterproductive, and it plays straight into the hands of Russia and indeed the Assad regime. So the UK government calls on Turkey to exercise maximum restraint and to bring an end to this unilateral military action.
This morning we drove as close as we could to Kobane, a Kurdish town in Syria, overlooked by Turkish watchtowers and fearing the Turks might invade. Kobane here on the border is one of the most iconic towns in the battle with Islamic State. In 2015, Kurdish forces recaptured it from the jihadists in battles which lasted months and left over 1,500 people dead. American ground troops and airstrikes were involved in that battle, but now American forces are pulling out. Last night, President Trump secured a commitment from President Erdogan of Turkey that he would not attack Kobane. But who knows how long that commitment will last. Further along this border, Arab militiamen on Ankara's payroll are still trying to drive Kurdish forces back. President Erdogan's vision is of a safe zone here that he can fill with millions of Syrian Arab refugees. But the death, destruction and heartache to build it does not bear thinking about. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, on the Turkey-Syria border.
Well, before we came on air, I spoke to Lizzie Irvin, a British humanitarian volunteer with the Kurds in northern Syria. And I asked her what the situation around her was on the ground.
Here in the city where we are, we're also seeing huge amounts of displaced people, of people who are now like internal refugees. The response is really incredible. They're put up in schools, put up in families, put up by and taken care of by the society. But that said, obviously resources are scarce. What we experienced here very directly was a shortage of water, and that's because of a Turkish warplane strike on like a big water plant. But there's two massive hospitals in this city, and hospitals not having enough access to water is a really serious problem.
And what is the attitude towards the Syrian government and the Syrian army?
People here fully understand the difference between someone who's an ally in this time because of the situation that we're in, and someone who is on your side and you can trust.
And what do the people around you, the Kurds around you, make of the Americans running away?
That people are furious and disgusted, although of course not completely surprised. There's an incredible tradition of self-reliance and resistance here. This is not about some poor, beleaguered people who need to be saved. But in terms of military support, we're asking for a no-fly zone to be put over Rojava, because if the Turkish warplanes were not flying overhead, then the forces here are confident that they can defend themselves.
And finally, what of ISIS?
I think there has already been a resurgence. We've already seen it, and it's only going to increase. ISIS fighters are escaping from the camps that they've been put in. The local security forces simply cannot hold the situation together when they're under pressure from Turkey at the back as well.
Well, Lizzie Irvin, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and we can only pray you stay safe.
Thank you.
Joining us now from Westminster, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Do you think the British government have been firm enough with Turkey, and indeed firm enough with the overall question of arms sales?
Look, I think the first people we haven't been firm enough with, frankly, is the United States. This is an absolutely appalling act by our closest ally to have withdrawn forces by tweet, effectively, so that we barely had any warning, and to change our diplomatic laydown and our military laydown in the region overnight. I mean, this has exposed us to looking like a fair weather friend to long-standing allies, and has potentially weakened our alliances in the region. And sadly, what's even worse than all that, as though that wasn't enough, it has given encouragement to our principal enemies, Iran and Russia, that they can control not just Syria, but in Russia's case can actually make good friends with Turkey, to whom they're already selling weapons, and with the Kurds. And this will only encourage them in areas like Georgia or Ukraine.
Now, what we do know about Donald Trump is that he wanted to get out of foreign wars. It looks as if at almost any cost. And I'm wondering what the analysis is of Trump's condition. I mean, do you think he even understood what was going to happen?
Well, it's very difficult to say, but all I can tell you is that senior US officials like General Petraeus have been extremely clear for a number of days, even weeks, about the reason why the United States was maintained an enduring presence. And let's not forget, this is actually a pretty light US presence, about 1,000 troops, most of whom will have been logistics in some way. You know, helicopters and aircraft require a lot of support. They need engineers and things like that to keep them flying. Most of the fighting on the ground was done by Kurds. It was done by the so-called SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. So this was a very light footprint by the United States, and it managed to keep, well, in fact, not just keep, but actually undermine ISIS, kick them out of Raqqa, destroy their territorial integrity, and see many of them locked up. Now that's all in reverse.
Do you think then the British government has been tough enough with the Americans? I mean, I want to ask you too about what should happen in terms of Britain's arms sales to Turkey. I mean, the fact is they've stopped future ones, but we know that there's £1 billion worth in the pipeline, which means they're either on ships or they're about to be on ships. The money's been paid.
Well, look, I'm afraid I don't know about existing arms sales. It's not something I've had a look at recently. But I think that coming into line with the French and the Germans and others on arms sales to Turkey would seem like the right thing to do. I mean, look, we should be supporting Turkey as far as the 3 or 4 million Syrian migrants that they have been hosting for the last 8 or so years is concerned. We should be making sure that we bear our side of the bargain of that. And by the way, the UK has done more than any other country except the United States in terms of helping Syrian migrants in the region, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Iraq, and of course in Turkey. So there's a lot of EU funding that should go in. But you're absolutely right. We need to be very clear with Turkey that, you know, this is a very important relationship to us. Turkey is a very important partner and has been for many years. But the idea that it can simply clear areas of land in northern Syria in order to expel migrants is just wrong.